Hello, welcome to the Autism Wine Hour. On episode 4, we talked to Sandy Hartranft, author and autism mom to Ben Hartranft, who's a motivational speaker and the source of inspiration for her book, Swinging from the Chandelier, Finding Joy in the Journey Through Autism. You can check them out on their website at benergy1.com to get info about the book and speaking events, and to see videos of Ben on The Price is Right and Ellen DeGeneres Show. I really enjoyed this conversation with Sandy, and I hope you do too. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and join us on the Autism Wine Hour. Cheers. Welcome to the Autism Wine Hour. I'm Eric. I'm your host. I'm here with Sandy. Sandy, do you want to give yourself a little introduction?
Sure. My name's Sandy Hartranft. I'm the mom of 3 boys, 30, 28, and 25. They keep having birthdays. And our youngest son, Ben, was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5. So that's where our journey on the autism spectrum had begun.
Right. So when did you first suspect that your son had autism? And was there like a particular event that led you to seek out a diagnosis?
Yeah. So when he was 2.5, when he was a year and a half, he was 18 months old. We thought he was deaf because we kept calling his name and he wouldn't respond. And now we know he didn't really know we were talking to him.
Right.
So we went to the doctors and they checked out his hearing and everything was fine. But nobody ever said, hey, there's probably a reason that you should continue to pursue this, that your child's not listening to you.
Yeah.
And he was a real late walker. And then by the time he was 2, a typical 2-year-old should have about 200 words. He had 20. They were all nouns and they were all food. That's the only thing he would ever say. Cookie,
Yeah.
pizza, cookie, cracker, cheese. And it just didn't sit right with me. But life was kind of busy with 3 boys and I kind of missed a whole bunch of other stuff. So I was really kind of focused in on that speech. And I'm a nurse. And one day at work, I was standing there and a speech therapist came up next to me and never met her before. And I just said, do you do speech therapy for children here? And she asked why. And when I told her, she said, oh, no, you have to call the IU, the intermediate unit. And that's like our early intervention in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And she said, it's paid for by your tax dollars. They'll come out and evaluate them. And that's what started us on our journey to autism.
Cool. Well, good thing you got that kind of that pat on the back to go look, because I'm sure that made a big difference. So what was that like? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. And then they came out. So these wonderful people came out. They was from Easter Seals. And when they did the evaluation, I had missed so much. He was so delayed in everything. Like I was so focused on speech that I missed how much his gross motor was delayed and his fine motor was delayed. I was like, oh my gosh, how did I miss all this?
Yeah.
So we started at school with 2.5 for him and I went with him and I really loved that because I got to watch the other teachers and how they worked with him.
Yeah.
And then when he was 3, I was able to put him on a school bus and they bused him to school at 3. Could have never done that if it was my first, right? You can barely put your first on the bus at kindergarten. But by the time it was my 3rd, I was like, oh, you'll be fine. Have a great day. And it was amazing.
That's great.
But the diagnosis was devastating. I would never equate it to the death of a child. That's the worst thing that could ever happen. But there is a death of a dream, right?
For sure. You have an idea in your head that like literally isn't going to happen now. So that's I think a pretty rough thing to get by.
And then it's replaced by fear. Like, oh my gosh, like, what does this mean? I ran to the library, tried to get all the books out in the world to see how this story ends. That book doesn't exist because no 2 of these kids are alike, right? So everybody's story is so different. And then it's that fear of the future. Like what will happen when we're no longer here? What will his life look like? So there was just a churning of emotions back in the day.
Yeah. And there was really a lot less information out there. It seems like a lot of information has come online like really recently, and the spectrum's kind of opening up, and people are starting to be aware of what to look for. But back in the day, it was a different story.
So when he was 2 and diagnosed, it was 1 in 250, and today it's 1 in 36.
Yeah.
So he was like on the cusp of this wave where they just kept having to get more programs developed because there weren't enough programs to go around. So we were the fortunate recipients of that. But in nursing school, they were still teaching the refrigerator mother theory, where it was the mother's rejection of her child that caused autism to happen.
Really?
That was actually literally in my nursing textbook. So when I got that
Yikes.
diagnosis, I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, that
not
stings
only
a
am
little
I
bit.
devastated, but now it's
Yeah.
my fault, right? That is
Yeah,
so not
that's
true.
terrible. No.
But yeah, horrible history that goes along with that.
Yeah, that's really tough. So can you kind of go back to kind of receiving that diagnosis? Like what's like the emotions you kind of run through? Like what was that like? And
Yeah.
how do you kind of start taking positive steps forward after that?
Yeah, so thankful for my husband. The two of us together were, just really devastated by it and not really sure what it meant. And then we kind of had this fear of like, how do you tell your family that there's something wrong with your child, and will they accept an imperfect grandchild? And absolutely, that was so unfounded. They have a wonderful relationship with Ben that, was just, they were such a gift to us.
Yeah,
But it was really just a lot of fear of just not knowing what the future was going to bring. And then, like I said, I felt a lot of guilt figuring there was something I did, and you just spend a lot of time, churning through those emotions. So I finally got to a point and I said, all right, this is just wasted energy. I can't go back and
for sure.
change anything, even if I could figure out what it was.
Yeah, yeah,
And so we kind of turned that forward, and we started doing a lot of research studies to try and maybe pay forward a little bit of information and knowledge to maybe help other people that were coming up behind us. And that's kind
that's
of
great.
how we changed our energy in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's important to find those kind of little steps where you can kind of redirect that kind of angst into something positive. I think is really
Hmm.
important to do. So, how
Yeah.
would you say that the impact of autism has been on your own mental health and well-being, and how have you maintained to manage your own self-care throughout this process?
Yeah. So, just again, being a worrier, it just added a whole extra layer of worry, just because as a mom, you do that anyhow. So I really had to come to terms with, I can only control what I can control. Our
Right.
faith is huge in our life. So we just know that God has brought the right person into our life at just the right moment. That has happened over and over again. We would get up against a roadblock, we wouldn't be able to find a speech therapist, or it wasn't working well. And then, just at the right moment, our turn would come up for speech therapy, and we found
Mm,
just the right person to help unlock Ben's speech. And then we'll get into that later, but had a horrible time with schooling, trying to get the right teaching methods for him so that he could learn to read and write. And that was a huge battle. But again, just at the right time, the right person. So just trying to have that faith to hold on to it kind of held us together. And then so
yeah.
thankful that my husband was on the same page, because, 50% divorce rate in America anyway. It's
Mm,
80% with special needs or the death of a child. So, the odds are not in your favor
for sure.
for
Yeah, that's a
that.
tough. It's a tough hand to be dealt.
Hmm.
So, how would you say the demands of parenting a kid with autism gets balanced with your own self-care needs and those with the other family? Like you have two other boys and a husband. Like, how does
Yeah.
that balancing act work?
Yeah, there's not enough of you to go around. So my middle son, Dan, he works with Ben now as a habilitation specialist. And so we started a little company, which I can get into in a bit. But Dan talks about the sibling perspective, and he shared stuff that I had no idea was going on in his mind. So he shared, like, growing up, he didn't feel like his problems were big enough to share because he saw all the stress that was happening
Right.
in our life. And man, I feel bad about that now, like that he didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I said, we spent what felt like more time with Ben. Basically, we were trying to keep him alive, right? Keep him
Yeah,
safe. But that's interpreted by your other children as you love him more because you're spending more time with
for
him.
sure. All that
So
attention goes there.
yeah, and Dan said, like, as a kid, you don't understand that Ben got 75% of mom's attention, and she doesn't have 150. So I should get
Right.
75 too, but she only has 100, right? So that the
Yeah.
math doesn't add up. But it was difficult on them. We tried our best to really do things individually with them one on one, particularly so that they would feel that. But I guess it just never felt like it was enough.
Yeah, it's not a perspective you hear of very much from like the other sibling, like to hear their kind of impacts from it. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So what worked for you and what didn't? And what techniques would you advise other parents to try?
Yeah, so you try everything, right? And so at Easter Seals, there was a wonderful teacher there. And I remember her saying to me, this was years and years ago, because he was only 3, you take all the information that you have, you make the best decision you can. And if it doesn't work, you can make another decision. And that was freeing, because I stress, like, is this the right class? Are we using the right program?
Right.
What if I choose the wrong thing, right? So ABA was just really starting to come about at that time. And so everybody said, do ABA, do ABA. And for Ben, it wasn't a good fit. Doesn't mean that it isn't a great program. There's tons of kids that
Right.
really, respond to it. He got bored with the repetition and he would make
Mm.
mistakes on purpose. And so, right, we tried that. And then we got into our school district. And after 6 years, he couldn't read or write. And, so now he's in fourth grade. He's been in school forever. And they kind of said to us, well, some kids it just doesn't come to. Maybe this is
Right.
what. So then there's this whole fear like, I don't want to stress my child, but what if I give up too soon? Like,
Yeah.
I want the best for him, but what if I gave up right before like the breakthrough?
Yeah.
So
Wow. Yeah.
that's a really hard line. And yet you don't want to press if you can't do it. I'll accept my child and love him no matter what that looks like.
Uh-huh.
So then again, right at just the right moment, God brought in somebody who introduced us to a really specific reading method that broke it open for him. And he went and gained 2.5 years of reading level in a
Really?
year, so just amazing strides. And that changed the outcome of his life because he can
Yeah.
read and write now, which,
Yeah.
is,
It's important. It's a big deal.
huge,
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize, you would say you would advise to try different strategies, just see what works, and hurry up and fail and get go on to the next thing and see what
Right.
what, what happens next.
Right. And what's hard is like I do love our school district, but school districts are also restricted by money. They're
Yeah,
restricted by services. So what might seem like, they're offering the best that you can, it may work for your child. But if you're not finding the success that you feel, it's okay to say we need to try something
for
else.
sure. Yeah,
Um,
I think
to not
schools,
give
just
up.
like everyone else, is doing the best they can with what they have, and the schools just don't really have a lot of resources to put towards individual kids.
Yeah.
So,
And
I mean,
yeah.
sometimes there's better options.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge proponent of like forced inclusion either. Like, I don't want anybody to be excluded, but I feel really horrible for the teacher that has 30 kids in her class, a couple gifted, a couple
Yeah.
special needs children, and all the other people in between. And how does she meet all their needs?
Well,
So,
I think in that situation, everyone suffers. Like
yeah,
the really high performing kids aren't getting what they need, and the really low performing kids aren't getting what they need, and the kids in the middle are just bored.
yeah,
And yeah,
that's it.
it doesn't
Yeah.
work for anyone.
Right. Right. So he was able to have really self-contained classrooms for all of his, really important academics. And then he was included in all the specials. So he still felt that inclusion and, participation with his peers, but the actual education had to be separated from that.
Yeah. So, how have you found support and resources for your family, and how have they been helpful?
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice I can give somebody is find parents ahead of you on your journey
Yeah.
because they're just a wealth of knowledge. So one memory that stands out for us is Ben played Special Olympics basketball, and we would go Friday nights and he would play basketball, but I sat and talked to the moms and they would say, "Oh, I just got a new supports coordinator." I'm like, "What's a supports coordinator? Why don't I have one and where do I get one?" So I just
Yeah.
learned about the resources in your area. So that's huge to find people ahead of you. On our website, and you can put that on maybe later, but it's just benergy1.com. We have a whole resource tab. So as people give us resources and things that we know have worked, we try to put them out there so people can find them. Like again, why recreate the wheel when somebody's
Yeah.
already done all of that
For sure.
information and knowledge?
Yeah.
What state are you in?
I'm in Florida.
I'm sorry?
I'm in Florida, in
Florida.
Jacksonville. Yeah,
Okay.
like Northeast Florida.
So what do they call your earlier intervention down there?
It's early learners.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it by school district or is it more by township?
I'm not actually sure how the school different district works.
Okay.
We work in a couple schools, but every district kind of has their own kind of swing on it.
Yeah. So it is different state to state. And I don't know what
Yeah.
Florida has, but one of the real blessings here in Pennsylvania is you can get secondary medical insurance, medical assistance with the disability, and it doesn't depend on your income. And
Wow,
so
that's very nice.
huge. So an example of that for Ben, my husband was paying for our insurance, primary insurance through his work, and they denied us speech therapy. So they would have paid for restorative speech. So if he learned how to speak and forgot, they would have paid for that, but they wouldn't pay for developmental speech.
Oh
And
wow.
so medical assistants paid for hours and hours of speech therapy that absolutely changed Ben's life that he would
Yeah,
have
I don't
been
think we have that in Florida, but that sounds like a really good program. You guys got
right.
lucky on that.
Right. But see, that's so unfair. Like, why isn't that federal?
Yeah.
Why isn't,
Yeah. No,
state to
it's
state?
unfortunate.
Hmm.
So, how do you foster communication and relationships between your child and their social networks? It sounds like Ben is really outgoing and active. He has his own website, a lot
Yeah.
going on. I'm sure. I hope we can get into later about like
Yes.
that his whole story. Um, but yeah,
Yes.
like how does that work?
He does it himself. People will look at him and like, "Are you sure he has autism?" Like, yeah, I'm sure he has autism because he doesn't fit the classic kind of picture of it. He loves, loves, loves people, and networking is just his like superpower. He'll talk to anybody, and he treats everybody the same. You can be the janitor or the CEO, and he's going to meet you and greet you with the same energy and respect for anybody. So he just draws people to himself. I
That's
think the
great.
hard part is deeper friendships probably aren't there. And Ben would think, everybody's his friend, right? And I'll be
Mhm.
like, well, he's like, I met a friend today at the mall. What's his name? I don't know. Well, then it's probably not a friend.
Right.
So that whole area
Kind of
is,
boundaries, I guess. It's tough.
yeah, and just difficult to maintain real deep friendships. I think that's something that's missing a lot with the kids on the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you want to go into like what does Ben have going on? Do you want to tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that whole story? It sounds like he was on the Today Show, or like he
He
was on all kinds of stuff.
I know he dreams big. So in middle school, we came back after this wonderful school that taught him how to read and got back to his regular classrooms. And he came to us one day and said, "I'm going to run for homecoming king in our high school." And I was like, because back in our day, that was the cheerleader and the
Yeah,
football player, right?
yeah,
And I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want people making fun of him. I don't want it to be a
yeah. You don't
joke,
want him to
right?
like do something that's going to make him, kind of
Right.
carry trauma throughout the rest of his life.
Right.
Yeah,
And then, a lot of people just said to us, look, in some ways you do have to learn natural consequences. So like if everybody does it, that's great. If he loses, he has to learn to accept those things too. Well, there's 3,000 students in our high school and they absolutely adored Ben and they voted for him and he won homecoming king. So then in his mind, nothing was off the table for achieving, right? He's like, Mom,
wow,
I told you I could do it and I did it. I'm like, oh boy, now what does that mean?
yeah,
So then the next thing on his mind was he wanted to be on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And I'm like, why would that ever happen? Like, we're just,
right.
normal people from Pennsylvania. Like, why would you be invited on Ellen? So I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make it happen, Mom. Like, all right, well, go for it. I don't know what that looks like, but have at it. So 3 years, he just had all his friends write in, and he does a lot of work with our Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay.
So Jeff Lurie owns the Philadelphia Eagles football team. Jeff Lurie's brother has autism. So they have a whole
Uh,
autism initiative and fundraising. And so everything culminated the year we finally won our Super Bowl. And Ben got a call one day and the phone said Burbank. And he's like, that's where Ellen is. I'm like, okay. So he answered the phone and it was a producer. And they said, we want it. We heard you're doing some wonderful
no
things. We'd like
way.
to interview you. So they interviewed him and then they said, well, we'll get back to you, but don't tell anybody that we called.
Mhm.
Well, he just wanted to about pop because his dream was coming
For
true.
sure.
6 weeks went by with no phone calls. Every time the phone rang, every time the doorbell rang, he was, it's got to be Ellen. It's got to be Ellen. I'm like, they better like call or
Yeah.
put this to bed because I
Right.
can't live like this anymore. So 6 weeks later, they called and they said, it was on a Friday. We want you out here Wednesday. That's how much notice we had.
Wow.
And they said, you're not going to meet Ellen. You're just going to be on the Ellen tube and shoot like a video. And, as a reward, we'll let you watch the audience. But that was just a ruse to get him there.
Uh,
So the day before they called, I had just had my knee replaced. So I was
Jesus.
post-op
Perfect
with a
timing.
huge, yeah.
Yeah.
So we said, can we reschedule? And they said, no. I was like, okay. Like, we'll get you a wheelchair. I'm like, you don't understand. I can't fly cross country. I can't even bend my knee at a 90-degree
Right.
angle. So anyway, my husband and he went, had a wonderful father-son, and they didn't need me. Like, I'm sorry that I missed out on the fun, but
Yeah.
they certainly didn't need me there. So he gets all the way out there. He's in the green room with John Dorenbos, who was a former Eagle player, and he's interviewing him. And if you've gotten to see the video, which is on our website, it's hysterical because Ellen interrupts the video and invites him out, and Ben just screams like a little girl. So
Wow.
really
That's
just
amazing.
fun things.
Yeah, that's like some
So
storybook stuff.
incredible experience. So then after that, thousands of comments. Like we just got so many incredible comments on like the Facebook posts and everything. People were so encouraged because he told his story to Ellen. And then they're like, well, come to our school and tell your story. We're like, okay. So Ben would go and do like a little assembly. And then the schools would say, well, what do you charge? And we're like, charge? I don't
Yeah.
know. What does that mean?
Yeah.
so, so we took donations and gave it to the Eagles Autism Challenge.
Uh-huh.
And in the midst of all this, Ben graduated from high school and fell off what we call the adult cliff, right? So, like everything in school,
Right.
years and years of trying to figure it out, binder after binder of papers, and then poof, adulthood. There's
Yeah.
nothing there. And we really thought he would find a full-time job and get benefits, and that's not how that played out. So he came to us and said, look, I just want to be a full-time speaker. We're like, okay, what does that look like? So we
Yeah.
started our company, Benergy One Presentations, and he goes into schools and businesses and tells his story. And he's amazing. He is
Wow, that's great.
fearless.
That's awesome. Good for him.
Yeah,
That's thinking big for sure. I don't
it
even think
is.
that would have popped in my head that that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Like that's impressive.
And he couldn't do that alone. So
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
husband and I still work, but I'm the secretary. My husband's the treasurer. His brother Dan's the vice president. So
Yeah.
Ben does all the cold calling. He'll call up school districts and principals and intermediate units and say, hey, do this thing. I'd love to come in and do my presentation. And then if he gets a nibble, then Dan kind of, talks to the people, kind of sets up all the details, and then goes with them to the presentation. So really all Ben has to do is what he's the best at.
Yeah. Kind
But
of
his
bring the
message,
magic.
yeah, his message resonates with every age group. He's done kindergarten all the way through senior citizen centers, but it's a message of inclusion and kindness and just perseverance, because all the hard things that he's had to go
Yeah.
through in his life.
Yeah. That's great. And where can people find him at again?
Right. So benergy1.com. So it's Benergy, Benergy, the number 1.com. And everything is on our website. So there's the video of him on the Ellen DeGeneres show. There's the video he got to carry the Lombardi trophy when we won the Super Bowl.
Oh,
They
very
asked him to
cool.
go to the ring ceremony. Just amazing opportunities.
That's great.
And then that whole tab of the resources is there. And then if anybody was interested in booking him, there's a booking tab on there as
Yeah.
well.
Awesome.
And then his latest excursion, he came and said, look, I want to travel. He loves to travel. I want to go on a trip by myself. I was like, again, the mom in me was like,
Yeah.
what? But my other son, Dan, said, look, mom, when you're not here, I'm not doing all this stuff for him. He's got to learn how to do it. So he sat down and they worked out a budget. And he said, look, if you want to take Ubers everywhere, you're going to have 20 or $2 a meal. But if you take the bus system, you'll have $25 a meal. So Ben's
Yeah.
like, all right, fine. So we should have put like some stipulations on where this trip was, but he picked California. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So he went to California. And while he was out there, he said, I'm going to get on the prices right, which he did.
How do
And
you
he
pull
got,
that off?
so in the olden days, you had to stand in line for hours and get
Okay.
tickets with the
Yeah.
hope of getting on the show.
Uh-huh.
Now, since COVID, you actually have a reservation. So he knew
Right.
he was going to be in the audience just by writing in and getting the tickets, but you
Okay.
don't know if you're going to get picked. But he got picked and he got up on contestants row and he won a laptop. And then he played a game and he won $16,000.
Jesus, that's a pay for the vacation.
I know, it's incredible.
Yeah,
And
that's amazing.
so that video's out there too. He actually even went to the showcase and almost won a trip to Australia in a car, but the other man was closer than Ben was with
Oh,
his bid. But
still, what a
amazing,
great story.
just amazing opportunities. But like
Yeah.
nothing seems out of reach for him, And if something's a no, he'll be like, okay, then he just goes on to the next thing and just
Wow.
keeps moving.
That's great. What's the secret? Like, how does he just,
He really doesn't see any limit. He just
yeah,
always
that's,
he's always thinking and planning almost incessantly. Like we'll be at a wonderful, like his passion is amusement parks. He loves roller coasters. We'll be at an amusement park having a lovely day and he'll be like, oh mom, who's having Thanksgiving this year and what are you bringing? I'm like, all right, it's April. I'm really not thinking
yeah,
about that right now, but that's his mind is always like
it's always
planning the
working.
next thing. So as
Cool.
soon as he achieves one goal, he's on to the next.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just to not see anything as an obstacle, just to like really look at something as anything you can think of as somehow possible. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
He's, a-
mindset.
he's amazing.
So take us back to what your experience was like with the educational system.
Yeah.
Did you have to advocate for Ben's needs, and what actions would you recommend other parents take?
Yeah. So one thing, if you have, spouse, even just a friend, take somebody with you to those IEP meetings. There's nothing more daunting than sitting there with a table full of people that are
Yeah,
going to tell you, where your son's at or what he can have for services. And if you're by yourself, just trying to remember everything that you heard. So my husband always went with me to that, and that was a huge, huge support. And then, like I said, you don't have to accept what they're offering as the final answer. So we got to a point where, again, they really didn't think they were going to do anything with the reading, and we went to due process because we really did find this program that worked and had him out of district. He went to a private school for 2 years, but that took a huge legal battle that I don't ever wish on anybody, right?
yeah,
That was very painful and very hard. But again, I would do it again because it changed the outcome of his life.
yeah. Wow. So can you share some strategies or techniques that have been helpful in supporting Ben's development and managing challenges that have come up?
Yeah. My husband's really good at just thinking outside the box. So with the incessant planning, like one of the things we finally came up with was we call it P&P, so planning and prayer. We would just say, Ben, look, we're not going to plan right now, but save that. And tonight we would give him 15 minutes to just dump. Right, here's your 15
Yeah.
minutes, whatever's on your brain. But it helped him because he knew we were going to listen to him, but not right that moment. So we could say, save it for P&P, save it for
Oh, yeah.
P&P.
Smart.
So that was, kind of helpful for us. One of the things we'll say to him is put it in the box. So if he's really perseverating on an idea, put it in the box means we've heard you, we
Mhm.
understand, we're done talking about it. And sometimes just like that mental picture of being able to
Yeah.
put it away is
Did you
really
have an
helpful.
actual physical box?
Somebody actually did make one of his
Really?
teachers made him a little
Okay.
box. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that seems like it'd
sometimes
be really effective.
yeah, they can visualize it or having that. We did a ton of social stories. Are you familiar with Carol Gray and social stories?
Yeah.
So, yeah, when his first grandparent passed away, we made up a book about Pop Pop. And, you want to say it in a way that's not scary. You don't want to say they just went to sleep because you don't want them to be
Right.
afraid to go to sleep. So we choose our words very carefully. And then that social story, we could repeatedly read it the same way over and over again. And that was really
Oh,
comforting. We even wrote one about why you shouldn't kick dad's chair in the car while he's driving.
yeah,
Whatever it takes to learn those
for sure. Yeah.
lessons.
Whatever kind of lessons you need taught, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And he's a real, real literal thinker. So teaching abstract concepts was really, really hard. That was one thing that was really difficult too. So we did a lot of scripting, trying to help him memorize things until he could physically understand things. That was
Hmm.
helpful as well.
Interesting. So, how would you advise someone who navigates the process of finding support and resources for their family? Like,
Yeah.
where do you look, or where do you
Yeah.
go?
I think we're so fortunate in this day and age with, technology. We didn't have the internet back in
Mhm.
our day. When we finally got it, it was dial up, right? So just access, like on your phone, you can look up anything. Now, it doesn't mean the information is all good, right? You have to really be able to tease through it, but at least you have access to it. There are wonderful support groups online too. So, if you can join those different support groups, and you can pop a question out there and you'll have 20 people give you an answer. And
Yeah,
again, they may not all be where you're looking or exactly right, but we didn't have that back in the day when he was first being diagnosed. We really had to physically go somewhere to
yeah,
be in a support group. So I really am grateful for that and we still do it today. I'm a member of a number of online groups that I just love to
yeah,
see what people are talking about, or hopefully we can offer information of things that we learned along the way.
yeah. There's some great info on just social media, just like kind of crowdsource, kind of bouncing ideas off each other. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people get a lot of value from that, I think.
Absolutely.
So, what advice do you have for parents on finding the right balance and support with independence with a child with autism? Like, how do you
Whew,
balance those two?
that was really hard. Yeah. So one of my husband's dreams for Ben was that he would learn to drive, and I'm like, I'm out. Right. That's
Yeah,
tag. You're it. So he
yeah,
taught my my other two boys to drive, and he's like, look, he can do this. It took 3 years, where it took 6 months for our other boys. So 6 times as long. Ben failed the practice tests. You're the permit test 6 times. It took him 7 tries before he
Yeah.
passed that. And then we took 3 years of really being on the road, taking it very slow. And he passed his test on his first try and he drives now, which really changed my life. So
Not
being
bad.
able to just find different ways to be able to learn, it takes longer, but to set that bar high because they can do so much.
Yeah, for sure. So what would you say some of the biggest challenges have been with Ben
Yeah,
throughout the process?
yeah, the reading was huge for me. Like that's always going to be a really hard memory. I spent a lot of tears because again, I wanted it so bad for him and I didn't know if he could do it and I didn't know if I
Mm.
was pushing too hard or giving up. Like that line has always been so hard. So that was a
Yeah.
huge, huge
I've never really
struggle.
thought of it like that, but you really don't know whether you're pushing too hard or if you're not hard enough. Like you don't
Yeah.
kind of know until you're there.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I remember one IEP and his goal was he would learn 25 new words a quarter. So that's 100 words a year, but you need 3,000 words to be literate. So I'm like, okay, so he needs
Yeah.
20 years of education.
Yeah.
Like that math doesn't add
That's
up for
daunting.
me. You know? But, if you say 25 words and he achieves it, then he made adequate progress because he achieved his IEP goal.
Yeah.
So again, it's just a really fine balance between not frustrating, but not giving up too soon. So that was
Yeah.
a really big challenge. I
Yeah.
think the friendship is something that's still really hard. He has a few people I would call close friends for him, but he looks at his brother's lives and it looks so different from his. And there's some sadness there, I think. Like, well, why can
Mm.
he go out every weekend with a bunch of friends? And why does he have lots of friends that come over or gets invited to lots of parties? And there was some loss that way that was hard to watch.
Yeah. How's he doing with that now? Like how do you think or what's been like the process for him to go through that or like kind of is that something that's in the process being worked on or
Yeah, we're still working on it. So,
yeah,
just trying to find groups of people. And I think now it's about things that you enjoy. So finding activities that you like to participate in. And that's how he's going to build some more friendships that way. But he just keeps himself so busy. He's always looking, to do the next thing, to go to the next movie, to go to the next amusement park.
yeah.
It's hard for him to stay still. He's not good at like entertaining himself in the house. He
Mm.
likes being out and about.
Yeah, sounds like he's a really outgoing guy, like really social.
Yes, that
Yeah.
is true.
So how have you found like your story seems like it's been like you've carried on a really positive attitude throughout the whole time. How do you kind of maintain that positivity in the face of these challenges?
Yeah. So I don't know if I share with you that we wrote a book about Ben's life.
Yeah.
So it's called Swinging from the Chandelier because
Okay.
when he was 3, he literally was on my chandelier stimming on the lights. And I said, oh my
Wow.
gosh, if I ever write a book, that's what I'm going to call it. But the
Yeah.
second part of the title is Finding Joy in the Journey Through Autism. So it's not about happiness because happiness is circumstantial. And as soon as the
Yeah.
circumstances change, your happiness goes away. But joy is not dependent on that. And so this book came out of my sister-in-law giving me a journal when Ben was first diagnosed. And she said, look, just write. And I'm not a really faithful journal. It wasn't like every day I wrote down everything. But 20 years later, I was able to look back and say, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was going to live through that. And now
Right.
look where we are today.
Wow.
And so it was really encouraging to see the hard things really did get solved, maybe not as quickly or as fast as I wanted them to. And then there were hysterical stories that I forgot about. Like one of my favorites that I found in my journal later was one day Ben was telling me he didn't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. Why do I have to go to school? And finally, I was so frustrated. I just said, look, Ben, it's illegal. You have to go to school. And at that very moment, his bus pulled up, and for some odd reason, there was a police car behind it. And he took one look out that window and his eyes popped open and he's like, okay. And he never fussed again. I was like, I have
Wow.
no idea why that happened, but I laughed, reading back through the journal and finding that. So I would encourage people to journal to
Yeah.
remind themselves of how far they come.
That's great advice. That's I didn't you know about that book. That's great. I'll add that in the
Thanks.
description and
Yeah.
give that
And
a
that's on our
read.
website too.
Yeah.
We sell them right out of our website. So
Okay.
benergywand.com, it's on
Yeah.
there. And then when I said I wanted to write a book, Ben said, well, I want to write a book. So the back section is actually all Ben's words and pictures of his own life. So he wrote the
Awesome.
back section, which is kind of cool too.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a look. And that sounds like it'd be a great resource to give to people that are just kind of stepping in that role of getting that initial diagnosis. So that
Yeah.
sounds really great.
Thank you. And we really are hoping just to encourage hope, right? Because we
Yeah.
want them people to, and again, you can't promise that your life's going to turn out like Ben's life, but there are some key points about persevering and really pressing and doing that can
For
really
sure.
encourage other people on the way.
That's
Another
great.
thing that I didn't do well that I always wished I had done better. Ben is on some medications. He's got all the DDs, right? The attention deficit and
Mhm.
everything else. He's got some OCD, but medications, I didn't do really well with documenting what worked and what didn't. So if
Hmm.
you're considering medications or trying medications, keep good records because every time you go to a new
Yeah.
doctor, they're like, what meds is he on? Well, did you try this? Well, why did you stop it? I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't remember.
Right. Or even just to make your own little journal entries of like how you observed his behavior kind of changing, and like that could be really valuable input for a
Yeah.
doctor that is looking at that for sure.
Yeah. And we're always looking for the wow factor. Like if you take a medication and you don't see like, wow, that made a difference, like then it's not
Yeah,
the right medicine.
for
And
sure.
it's not, again, hard and fast. There are no autism medicines. There really are medicines that help with some symptoms.
Right.
So there's a difference there, but that's something I would really encourage people to do as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's probably good advice for anyone going through like a hard point in their life is to start journaling. Like
Hmm.
that, I think that'd be pretty valuable to go back onto a couple years later to kind of read through that. It'd be really interesting.
Absolutely.
So, how has your perspective on parenting and life overall changed based on your experience of being an autism parent?
Yeah. So, first kid's born, you check all the fingers and toes and you're like, whew, everything's okay. Right. And
Yeah.
then the second one, you're like, oh, good. And then you're waiting for the shoe to drop. You're like, all right, something's coming. You just like, nobody's going to get through this life unscathed. Right.
Yeah.
Like, what's it going to be? And as hard as it was, I was still very thankful that it wasn't something that was painful for him. Like, there's so many things as a nurse you see people who struggle physically and that would be really hard to see him in pain, or struggling that way.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes you're like, oh gosh, if he just had a little bit more, he might have been able to go through college and his life would look different and his goals and dreams might have been different. So it was really just learning to love and accept him for who he is and try to,
Yeah.
make the best of the situation and the best outcome for him personally.
Yeah. That's great. So, what do you think this has taught you about yourself? Like all these challenges you've overcome and kind of the way you've done it. It's
Yeah.
been a really interesting path you've had that you appear to be really successful with. Like,
Well,
what's the secret?
it has been a journey. So I think two things. So for my husband's a real introvert, and Ben has made him an extrovert. So it's really a positive thing that he's shown my husband that it's okay to be out there and to be more open. So that was a positive outcome for him. For myself personally, I hate conflict. I am just a conflict avoider from the get-go. I'm a middle child. I'm a peacemaker. I want peace at any price. But it turned me into a mama bear, right? Like I had to really be able to go to bat and step up when things were uncomfortable. So it helped shape me in a better way with one of my weaknesses. And then even for our whole family, it was positive for the boys because my older two, they're not afraid of any disability. So many people see somebody in a wheelchair or they just turn their head. They are just
Yeah.
right in there. They've served in Special Olympics, like nothing's abnormal for them because they've just been immersed in that world. So there
Right.
really were a lot of positives along the way as well.
That's great. So, what advice would you have for parents that are just starting out on their autism journey and feel kind of overwhelmed with all this news and all this fear and just this
Yeah.
big cloud that comes in with it?
Yeah. I think important right off the bat, get rid of the guilt. There's no room for that. There's no blame. This is nobody's fault. You didn't do it, right? There are just, unfortunately, we live in a broken, fallen world and there are things that happen. So I think it's really important to not have any of that in your mind. So to just put yourself at peace for that. Accept it, that it's not easy and it's not what you would have chosen, but you take what you have and to move forward with it. And then, like I said, find other parents ahead of the journey on your journey, because they are just a wealth of knowledge in your area. Like, I don't know what's in Florida. I don't know what resources are there, but I certainly know what's in Pennsylvania, right? So if you can find other
Yeah.
people, stay connected. And then if you have family in the area, we're so fortunate. We have all of our extended family within 15 minutes. That's very uncommon these days, that people really have a lot of family support, but our family's wonderful. But find people that you trust to give yourself a break. So if somebody offers to watch your child, take them
Yeah.
up on
Take
it.
it.
Like, you're not the only one that can care for and love that child. Our church does respite programs. There are wonderful respite programs in the area too, in our area. So they'll take your child for a date night. So they have nurses and everything there so that everything is safe and you feel comfortable that you can go out and work on your relationship. So let other people into your life that can help you and support. So find that village. I think that's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, that's important. I would also, it's something we do a parents' night out at our ABA clinic. So
It's
where we
huge.
just, yeah, it's, and I'm surprised at how few people take advantage of it. It's really a great resource.
Yeah.
So we just have
Do you
our
have
therapists.
do you have an age range that that you top off at?
Not really. Most of ours are within the 3 to 12 age range, so we kind of specialize in more early learners.
Right.
But yeah, it kind of, we can put a program together if we have the right kids.
That's great. No, they
Yeah,
need it. They need that break. You're so immersed day after day of everything. And then that's on top of just what you normally have to do to live,
yeah,
right?
for
Like
sure.
all the extra therapies and meetings and phone calls and hours that you spend on the phone talking to insurance companies, like all of that's on top of regular life. So to give that to the families, that's a real gift.
Yeah, I'm really proud of it. Like it's pretty cool to be a part of.
That's great.
So how do you like? How would you describe what autism is to other people? Like, what have you come to understand about the condition from kind of this whole process of being involved in it?
Right. So when Ben was about maybe 5 or 6, he came to us and said, like, what is autism? Like, cause we were very open about talking about it. So to explain it to him, we just said, look, Ben, your brain just thinks differently than everybody else's. Everybody's different. And his response was, I want to take my brain out and wash the autism off. And that just killed me. I was like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, if only. And yet, it's part of who he is. If he didn't have it, I don't know if he would have the same outgoing person. I don't know. I don't know who he'd
right.
be without it. But the other moment that really stands out to me, when he was first diagnosed, it took us like 4 months to get the appointment with the developmental pediatrician. It's like a year and a half wait now. So 4 months felt like horrible, but now
Yeah.
it's even worse. But I'll never forget the day he was diagnosed with PDD NOS, which was pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. It's what they used to call autism back in the day.
Mhm.
But I had in my mind that it was pervasive developmental delay. And in my mind, a delay you can make up, right? Or we're a little behind, but if we work
Right.
harder. And the doctor was very specific that it was developmental disorder. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, like that's
Yeah.
different. I'm just
Yeah.
not going to be able to close this gap. This is really more
Yeah.
serious than that. So really understanding, and they keep changing the terminology, but accepting who they are, but understanding what they can do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. So, what are your thoughts on the future of autism research, and what do you hope to see come up in the next coming years as far as like things they're working on or anything?
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the Eagles. We're huge Eagles fans here, in case you can't tell.
Yeah.
Uh, but they do a Eagles Autism Challenge every year. And it's a 5K bike walk or run. So we do the walk and you raise money. And so far in the 6 years they've been doing it, Ben's raised over $100,000 personally
Wow.
for that organization. But what I love about it is Jeff Lurie foots the bill for the event, and every single dollar that's raised goes to fund novel research. So they bring in a scientist and they vet the people who are applying for the money. And so that you just can't say, oh, I'm doing autism. You have to prove you're doing something new.
Yeah.
So we feel really good about that they're really trying to make a difference going forward. I hope they find a gene or something that they can
Yeah.
do to make a difference, that at least we could quell some of the hard parts of this. Like, there are so many kids that don't have the speech ability, right? That they're
Right.
locked with these brilliant brains, but their brain doesn't connect to their
Yeah.
speech. That's devastating too. So be able to figure out why some of those things are happening to make a difference for the kids.
Yeah, yeah, it's important. Hopefully they do. Well, that was all the questions I had from the artificial intelligence recommendations.
They were good.
Yeah, I thought they turned out pretty good too. But it was really great talking to you. Hopefully we can get some people sent your way to check out your book and podcast and everything Ben has going on.
That'd be great. There's
Yeah,
fun stuff on the website to be you see those videos. They're all out there. It's really great to
yeah.
watch.
And
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone watching is curious about or interested about being a guest, you can send us an email on autismwinehour@gmail.com. You can check us out on YouTube or podcast catchers, Spotify or Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. This will be streamed there in the next few days. And it was really great getting to meet you. And hope nothing for the best but you and Ben.
Thank you so much. And we're happy to answer questions too. If anybody writes to it, there's an email tab on our website too. We'd be happy to reach back out if anybody has any specific questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. It was a really
Thanks.
pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Autism Wine Hour. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you know someone who's an autism parent, please share this podcast with them. Check out one of our other episodes if you liked what you heard. If you're in the Jacksonville area and you're looking for a career working with special needs kids, please send your resume over to us at hello@shiningstarsaba.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day.